Welcome back, friends, to the Healthy Christian Leader. I have my guest, Dr. Cheryl Ann Beals, with me today, and we have been talking about how to struggle well. What a great topic. Why do we need to struggle? Because struggle is part of life, and so we need to learn that the fact that we're going to struggle, and there are good ways to struggle and bad ways to struggle.
Exactly.
So how do you teach leaders to lead while struggling? If struggling is going to be part of life and part of the journey and part of how God forms us, which we've talked about, what does it look like to struggle well while we're leading others?
Well, I think it's our theology of it. If we have a theology that God uses struggle.
Tell me more about that.
Our tendency is that we only think God uses the easy things and the things that feel good and the things that are bright and shiny and pretty. We have a hard time with the fact that God uses the mess and the difficult things, that he uses discomfort, that he uses suffering, all of that. So if we have a theology of God using the uncomfortable parts of life, the difficult things of life, then we will look for him in those places. We'll look for him in the wilderness. We'll look for him in the dark. We'll look for him amongst the dying, expecting resurrection. So part of it is our theology. So how we see God, how we see ourselves, and then our expectations. If I expect that struggle is going to be a part of my ministry because God is going to use it, when it happens, it's like, oh, okay, knew it was coming. It's here now. So God, what are you going to do with it? How are you going to help me through it? What am I going to learn, Lord, in the midst of this? How's God going to show up in a new way? So it becomes an opportunity actually to journey with God.
How do struggles form us spiritually in healthy ways?
It actually, struggle, discomfort, hard things form us more than happy things.
Tell me more about that.
Well, yeah, because when we're struggling, we come to the end of ourselves. We recognize our need for God. It causes us to cry out to God. Suffering purifies us. It strips away what's not really important and helps us to focus on what's really important.
Well, it probably strips away a lot of our resistance to God.
Yeah.
And the hardness.
And the superficial, all of that. So
and the doors that are closed to him. I remember, Cheryl Ann, quite a few years ago, listening to Argentinian Baptists, and there was a move of God actually happening in Argentina at that time, and huge things were happening in the lives of people in terms of experiencing freedom in Christ, you know, life change, big life change. And I remember them saying, you know, the heart is a very complex thing. There are many chambers in the heart, and there can be one chamber of our heart that is open to God and yielded to God, while other doors are closed. And it seems like that's true, doesn't it?
Yeah, it is. Well, we have many, many parts. I always say we have many, many parts. And some of our parts are friendly with God, and some of our parts are rebellious against God. So it's trying to bring everybody on the same page into relationship with God, all parts of us. And that's the journey of life.
Do you think we can actually be in a place where we think we're yielded to God and actually have other chambers of the heart that are where the doors are locked solid?
Yeah, because we're never totally yielded to God. So if we don't have an understanding of being in process, then we're really deceiving ourselves. Because again, this side of heaven, we are not going to be complete, and we do not have the ability to be completely yielded to God. We're always on the journey, right? So, yeah.
How might a leader discern when they need to stay in their ministry, even in the midst of a struggle, and when it's time to step away?
Yeah. Well, it starts with first discerning God's presence. How is God present or absent in this present time of my ministry? What is God doing? What is the source of the struggle I'm having? Is it coming from God? Or is it coming from the enemy? Is God wanting to use this time? So a lot of questions to ask God and to ask myself about it. And being aware of how the Spirit is moving. Because often, in some of these struggles is where we grow the most and God brings a breakthrough and victory. The other thing is that if God is moving, there will be struggle because the enemy will be trying to prevent what God is doing. Mm-hmm. So part of it is also learning how to expect it as a part of the journey. If God's working and there's not some way in which the enemy is trying to disrupt it, I question whether God is working. Because we are in a battle. Spiritual warfare is real.
Yeah, we tend to miss that in ministry. Tell me more about that. Tell me more about spiritual battle and the reality of it.
Well, first thing I think is that we tend to think that the spiritual battle is often about demons and all of that. That's not the biggest spiritual battle. The biggest spiritual battle is everyday powers and principalities, right? Everyday stuff that kind of gets in the way between us and God.
So what do you mean by powers and principalities when you say that?
Okay, well, biblically, powers and principalities are everyday things in creation. So let's say one of the biblical examples is money and mammon. Something that God has created to give structure to life, but it's overstepped its boundaries. So money becomes mammon when it oversteps its boundaries and then has a power and a control. And that can be almost anything.
Well, and it's interesting because money is something that you can have a problem with when you have a lot of it, or even when you don't have much at all. I mean, you can struggle when you're going to Tiffany's or the dollar store.
That's right. That's right. It's your relationship with it.
Yes, it's that heart issue.
Yeah, and if we allow it become a power in our lives.
Right, or have power.
Yeah, and powers are trying to disrupt our relationship with God. When they were originally created to help us grow in our relationship with God, they are now disrupting. So it's looking at what are those things that are getting in the way of my relationship with God that I've allowed to become powers in my life.
We're talking about here the struggle of ministry. How do we determine, when we need to stay in ministry in this struggle, the midst of struggle, and when do we determine when it's time to go because of struggle?
Because of struggle? Well, there's two types of struggle, right? There's an internal struggle, the struggles in me, and then there's the struggles that are external to me in my environment, right, in my context. When the struggles in me are getting in the way of ministry and God using me, that's usually a sign I need to take a break somehow.
And what would that look like? Like, what are some examples of that?
If I'm struggling with some form of addiction or some form that it's controlling me and I don't have control over it, then sometimes that means I have to step away for a bit. If I'm struggling with extreme anger or something's going on that trauma sometimes will do that, like there's trauma or something or being triggered by something that I'm not able to get a handle on in the midst of ministry, then I need to step away to process it. And that stepping away can be taking a week off, to taking a sabbatical of 3 months, to taking a year off. I mean, it depends on what it is. But there's certain things that we need to process sometimes that we can't do in the midst of ministry, because ministry takes all your energy.
Yes.
And takes all your time. And so if you've got something significant that needs to be processed well, we often need to take some time to do that and to be able to pour our energies into it, which means stepping away for a time.
What about, we have numerous people who watch this program that are not in a ministry setting in a local church, but they're in a ministry setting within the marketplace. They're marketplace leaders in the kingdom and business. Sometimes you, particularly for those who are business owners, it can be almost impossible to step away. What do they do?
Well, I think there's preventative measures as well. And what I've learned in working with leaders, every leader needs to have some place one-on-one where they can process things. And that's not your spouse. That's with a spiritual director, with a counselor, with a peer, but somewhere where we can talk and process. So that's one of the things can help actually prevent getting to that place where it's so extreme, and that we can be ongoing processing things. We also need to have a community of peers that we spend time with, because we learn from their experiences and they learn from ours, and we help one another. So
that's true for pastoral leaders as well.
Any
critical.
Any leaders. These are true for any leaders.
Right.
The other is we need to take time for self-reflection. To stop and pay attention. I've noticed I've been negative lately. What's going on with me? Lord, what's happening with me?
That's self-awareness.
Self-awareness. Paying attention. Why did I say that today? That's not a normal thing I would say. So Lord, where's that coming from? Or so noticing when these spurs under the saddle are starting, you know, and pay attention to the discomfort. Don't just go to just kind of get used to it, but actually ask God, what's going on here? Because sometimes these are warning lights on the dashboard, like the flashing red light in your car. You know, if you don't pay attention to it, it can be pretty serious. And I really believe the Spirit gives us warnings. We just don't pay attention.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And, we're talking about basically soul care and taking care of ourselves, which is so important. Dr. Cheryl Ann Beals, it's been so great to have you here today.
Great to be
here.
Love
the conversation, how to struggle well. Share this with your friends, and we'll see you next time on The Healthy Christian Leader. Well, thanks for joining this conversation. I trust that you were encouraged and challenged by the stories and experiences that were shared today. Would you join us next week? You can find new episodes weekly in video form on the Aaron Ministries YouTube page and in audio form wherever you get your podcasts. Aaron Ministries is an interdenominational network of friends in ministry with a mission to foster healthy Christian leadership. Check out our website, aaronministries.com, for more information and resources, and on how you can donate to our ministry and potentially start a healthy Christian leader gathering in your area. Until we meet again, may you experience the Lord's blessing, grace, and peace. I'll see you next week.